Game over, man. Game over. Johnny.
You're gonna need a bigger potion.
So serious.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Welcome to episode 629 for March 23rd, 2025, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody. Really look forward to getting into this week's show. I do want to ask for some forgiveness up front because last week on the show, I told a story about how I went to Disney World with my family as we celebrated the second trip around the sun for my youngest, who turned 2 last week. However, we came home from Disney, and it turns out we brought more home than we bargained for, as my oldest son and I were very sick this last week, and I am still reeling from that.
So what exactly was it? You called it the Disney germs when we talked about it offline.
Yeah, I brought home some Disney germs. I think my son brought home some Disney germs, and then he gave me said Disney germs because he did get sick before I did. But I did get sick enough that I even had to miss a few days of work. It was not fun.
Dang, sorry to hear that, man.
Yeah, it wasn't great. And look, I'm feeling much better now, but you can still hear it in my voice. If you're watching us on YouTube, you could probably even see it on my face a little bit. A little pale, still recovering, got a little bit of a cough. When I went to
Normally
the
when that
theater,
happens, it's because we saw a bad movie. And in this case, there's more realistic circumstances plaguing you.
Yeah. And look, we love movies. We love going to the theater. When you're sick, obviously you don't want to go and get everyone sick. And I think I'm past the point of where I'm contagious, but I still have a little bit of that lingering cough that you get. And I don't want to disturb anybody. And I had a busy weekend at the theater because I went to see Black Bag for a second time. And then, of course, there were the new movies this weekend that we wanted to see that we'll review later on in the week. And every single time I went, I had to eat my weight in cough drops just to make it through the screening.
So basically, you taste nothing but cough drops right now. That is basically baked into your taste buds for the moment.
Yeah, my whole diet this last weekend was cough drops and coffee. That's it. That's about all it consisted of.
I might recommend adding a little bit of green tea or something like that to your diet. That might help, but definitely don't get rid of the coffee.
Yeah, no, I need the coffee to survive generally.
Sure.
Could have added some tea for sure, but yeah, cough drops, coffee, that got me through. But here we are. I am excited for this week's episode. We are going to be continuing our Best Picture movie series as we get to the 1964 film My Fair Lady. Do look forward to getting into that film. Before we do, though, Snow White obviously was the major release at the box office this last weekend. And we're going to use that as inspiration to do an exercise that we've actually done before on the show. It's been quite a long time. Some years ago, we did a top 3 list of animated movies that we'd like to see in live action.
Yeah.
And there's been enough time that some of those movies that we selected have come to fruition.
It was a bit of a predictive list. Yeah, a bit of a predictive list for better and mainly for worse, I guess.
So we're going to do a little bit of an update because I imagine most people out there listening, even if you did listen to that show all those years ago, you probably have no remembrance. I didn't even remember what all we picked until I went to look it up.
I didn't either. What year did we do that again? That was in response to some movie that was. I forget. And this may have been back in the Beauty of the Beast days. This may have been around 2017.
It might have been around that. I would say Beauty and the Beast. Yeah, because I was going to say maybe Mulan, but that was 2020. I think
it was later. Yeah.
Yeah, it was way before that even. So
I think I remember doing this exercise when I was still living in Louisville, Kentucky. So yeah, it was a while ago.
It was a while ago. I would say Beauty and the Beast or maybe even Peach Dragon. Like we're going back several years with that exercise. So we thought it would be fun to revisit that list, see what's come to fruition, and then we're going to update it. We're going to talk about more animated movies that we'd like to perhaps see in live action, and eventually we're going to boil it down to 5 films. The 5 films that Brendan and we are going to pitch this to Hollywood. We're going to make our way out to Los Angeles. We're going to walk into some major studio. These are our pitches. This is what we're going for. So that is the hook this week. Before we get to that, though, real quick, because I was at Disney last weekend, I was not able to be on either of the reviews for The Electric State or Black Bag. So quickly, I did want to give a few brief thoughts on both of those movies, if you don't mind here to begin with. The Electric State, I think we can do this rather briefly. That is one of the laziest films I have maybe ever seen. It is not good. And look, you're not walking into something inspired when 5 minutes in to that film, Joshua from Transformers Age of Extinction shows up on the screen. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, that is Stanley Tucci's character from Transformers Age of Extinction.
It's not even trying to give a new performance.
He is the main villain of the Electric State.
It's a shared universe. It's a shared universe after
Clearly. I mean, you talk about the two characters, quote unquote, two characters. But if we are going to separate them, two characters that have the same look. I mean, it is Stanley Tucci after all, but still they're going for the same look, the same mannerisms, the same delivery, the same motives, creating their own robots to fight sentient robots. The whole thing. The whole thing. It is a complete regurgitation of that character in every way, shape, or form. And then on top of that, they hire Giancarlo Esposito to play the exact same character that he's done this year, let alone the last several years. He's playing the same character from Captain America. Same character. Now,
and both times he didn't even have to interact with anyone on set.
No. Exactly. He just doing it from his own home.
I was just going to say, he probably did both performances from his living room.
Yes, exactly. Did not have to go anywhere. And look, got to give him credit. I mean, that's the dream, right? You get paid all this money to do nothing except pretend to hunt down some people from your own home. Like,
we often like to praise remote work, right? So I guess actors should be qualifying for that as well.
I just found that hilarious. And look, maybe that's just a credit to his agent that he's able to get Esposito into all of these incredible roles that are just the same. Like, and that's all he wants to do these days is be this badass bounty hunter of sorts. Because that's all he does. It's all he does. Even going back to the Mandalorian, I think his Star Wars character is essentially the same thing there as well. So I just find it hilarious. This movie's like, we're stealing from Star Wars and Marvel. We're stealing from Transformers. It is incredibly lazy in that regard.
Did we not learn anything from Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, that this guy is actually a better supervillain than he is anything else?
Yeah, I guess that is the only lesson to take away from any of that. And then, you look at the dialogue on The Norm, and I believe you guys talked about this on the review. It is unsurprisingly built around people doing laundry and not watching the actual TV screen. Yeah. Or, God forbid, iPad screen, whatever you're using to watch this movie.
Gosh, I can totally see someone watching this while cooking and having it on their iPad laying across like their island or something like that. I could totally see that.
That's exactly how this film was written. There's no doubt about it. The performance is completely uninspired. Yeah, I mean, for a movie that cost $320 million, where no one gave any effort whatsoever, is utterly mind-blowing.
That's why the first thing
crazy.
I asked Sharia when we talked about that on our review, and first off, for everyone listening, if you haven't checked out my review of that with Sharia Chavla, it's a really great conversation that I feel like we had. The first thing I asked him was, where in the hell did that $320 million go? Because for the life of me, I didn't see it. It sounds like you didn't see it either. It sounds like most people didn't really see where that money went. It's honestly kind of an enigma at this point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think all that money went to probably catering and everyone.
Which is important.
Which is important. Yeah. I mean, it does have a bit of an extensive cast. Maybe even the people doing the voice work had their own trailers, just to sit there on set for a few months.
If they were on set, because a lot of that feels like they didn't need to be on set for this kind of movie.
Well, no, but that's, I guess, the joke that I'm making.
Oh, gotcha.
Maybe, or the theory, maybe I should say theory.
I couldn't tell if you were being facetious with that. My bad.
Yeah. Is that, look, we have all this money. Let's just fly everyone in. Let's fly in Anthony Mackie. I think he's just next door doing Captain America anyway. We'll just create his own little trailer and he can just sit there, for 6 months until we need him.
They have to give some type of incentive to get these actors in the first place. So I guess those incentives cost money.
Yeah. I mean, some of it is on screen, the CGI work. There's a lot of visual world building, and that's probably where all that money went, because there's no tangibility to this film, or very little tangibility anyway.
Yeah.
And the last thing I'll say is, there was a lot of hoopla over Adrian Brody's voice work for The Brutalist. And look, with that film, I think it's egregious because we're talking about, and by egregious, I mean the discourse and the criticisms, because we're talking about amplifying an accent for 2 lines of dialogue in a 3-hour movie where he's on screen in every scene.
Sure.
So that to me is ridiculous. Like the performance is still very much intact with Adrian Brody there. With what they do in this film, using AI to amplify these voice characters, in particular, I think of Herman, Anthony Mackie. I love Anthony Mackie a lot. He is nowhere to be found with that character.
He's not in this movie. And
I'm glad in that movie.
I'm glad you're bringing this up, because this is something that Shari and I forgot to bring up during our review. So we at least have some outlet to talk about how egregious that this is, because essentially what this is doing is that it's essentially erasing Anthony Mackie from the movie in a way. And it's kind of disgusting. It's almost like they took him for his vocal mannerisms and that's it, but then took him out of the movie. It's kind of egregiously awful.
Yeah. Yeah, they just wanted his mannerisms, the way he articulates certain words and phrases. Like they wanted a behavior, a prototype. Yeah. And so they brought in Anthony Mackie for that and then just took him away from the performance. Because he is not in that performance at all.
No.
At all.
I didn't even know who.
You could apply that dialogue to him and you could see Anthony Mackie doing it. But you have to imagine that in your head, because his voice is not in that movie.
It sounds like AI trying to mirror his voice as opposed to him doing the essence of that voice in the first place before AI tweaked it. His voice sounds like an algorithm. It really does.
Yeah, exactly. It's ridiculous. So that film is really bad. And look, I have to give the film Love Hurts so much apologies, like so many apologies this year. Because when we reviewed that on the show, I said, this is going to be the worst film of the year. I don't know if it even been close. And look, that still might be the worst film of the year. I don't know. But
the monkey. The monkey's right there.
The monkey, The Electric State, very much give that film a run for its money. At least with Love Hurts, Ki Kwan gives a sincere performance. So there's at least something there that you can actually grab onto.
Oh, sure, yeah.
The Electric State, and I think the irony is
more like the blank state.
Yeah, the irony is, like, when I was watching it, I did not know about the whole AI thing. I thought Herm was actually a really great character. And that to me, I think, is the heartbreaking irony of all this. I think on its own
Yeah.
terms, in a vacuum, that character is really engaging, which makes sense because Mackie is an engaging performer.
For sure.
I think it's well rendered. That's probably where most of the money went, which makes sense because he's on screen a lot.
Yep, makes sense.
That is a really great side character in this film, and it provided a lot of the comedic backbone.
Yeah.
That was genuinely good. That is the one thing of the film I will give it credit for. I thought that character was great. And then you learn that it is all built around removing the performance.
It's built around a lie. It's built
It's
around
built
a
around
lie.
a lie. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is really, really frustrating.
Yeah,
So
in
in the end, there's not much redeeming about that movie.
It's a bad movie. I didn't mention this during our review, but I did watch the movie with my wife, and she was kind of looking forward to it because she likes Millie Bobby Brown. She finds her to be a very endearing presence, and we do too. I think she's a very talented actress. And not even halfway through with the movie, she looked at me and said, "I am bored. Can we change it?" Even she wasn't connected to it.
Yeah, totally understandable. On the other side of that spectrum, Black Bag freaking rules. Soderbergh is a madman. I love Steven Soderbergh so much.
Me too.
He
This
is
movie's
one of
so
my
good.
favorites working today. It is March, and he has 2 bangers out already. There is more than enough time for him to get out a 3rd or even a 4th by December. Let's do this. Let's get more out.
In a way, I'm kind of wishing that if he were to make more movies that came out this year, I don't know how these other ones will fare when compared to Black Bag or Presents. I kind of wish Black Bag came out later because then it would have been more top of mind in the awards conversation, because I feel like at least within our film critic circle, this is a film that it feels like everyone really likes, is really rallying behind. And that's always a fun narrative to see when there's some movie that's able to bring people together and it doesn't become this socio-political fight between how people feel about it, what it represents for certain things. This is just a movie everyone seems to get behind. And I love when movies can do that and then can go on to actually win things. Because everyone's going for this movie. Everyone's flocking to it. And rightfully so. The movie's great.
Oh, it's so good. Yeah, I have no idea. It's not going to have any sort of awards push at the end of the year.
No, it won't.
But I agree with you. I do wish that was the case because there is so much to love about this film. And I don't know if it's making money for Focus Features. I hope that it is. I honestly haven't looked into it all that
I'm
much.
going to quickly check that.
At a glance here, I think it's only made $24 million at the box office, but I could be wrong on that. You can double check me.
Yeah, you're right.
So, I mean, hopefully it's able to do a little bit more because this film is really fun. It is slick. It is utterly engrossing. I love the performances. There are these fun little twists at every single turn. I love that Soderbergh does not hold your hand through any of this. We're not really given much exposition on who these characters are, who they work for, what branch of the government might this be. Like, all of these answers are simply revealed as the film goes. You will have a lot of questions early on. You just sit back, go for the ride, and the Soderbergh slowly but surely unravels everything you need to know about this setting, how the characters are intertwined, and you have these fascinating character traits for each of them. And like, all of that is captivating in terms of the setup, the mystery, the writing, the dialogue, the performances. All of that is a masterclass on its own. And then you couple it with this being visually wild. It is one of Soderbergh's most intoxicating films. Like, it is so crazy
the
what
look,
he does.
the score,
The
just as
lighting,
a
the
sensory
score's really-
experience, it is one of the best.
It is so good. Yeah, and it's like, it's a slick 90-minute little movie, and Soderbergh still makes it cinematically engaging. It's almost experimental in some ways, in that regard. But it also works great as a fun little mystery thriller as well.
I agree. It's all the above.
Incredible.
It's a great buffet of a movie. It's a great Soderbergh buffet in some ways too. And this is something Max and I talked about during our review. And something I noticed was that it has the experimentation of modern Soderbergh, but still has the familiarity and nostalgia of movies like Ocean's 11. So it
Yes,
still has a commercial kind of sense to it. So it weirdly sits in this middle space that makes the movie even more engaging and intriguing for everyone. I feel like it's an amazing movie. I'm liking it more as I think about it further. I think I gave it a 4 out of 5 on Letterboxd, and yet I'm still thinking I might be underrating it by a slight margin by giving it just that score. I think it is quite terrific.
Good.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't imagine there was much in terms of the marketing budget. I don't think there's been hardly any marketing for this film. I could be way wrong on that.
No,
I haven't seen any though.
I think the total budget was around 50 to 60 million. I don't know if the marketing budget was incorporated into that, but still it has a ways
usually
to go.
Not.
Yeah.
It's usually not. But these days we tend to say you need to double the budget by 2.5.
2.5, yeah.
I don't know if you have to go that far for this film. I don't know if 2.5 covers the marketing. There's been little marketing.
Well, even so, yeah. And I think this
I don't
is
even
one
know
of
if
the,
you have to double the margin or
I don't
double
think-
the budget. Excuse me.
I don't think you have to here as well. And I think partially because this is one of those movies that seems to do well in the long term as opposed to the short term. I don't think this is quite one of those cases where producers are so concerned with the short term bottom line like they always are. This is one that I think could have legs, and maybe it could make some of that money back in a VOD setting.
Yeah, and that's exactly where I was going with this. I think at some point down the road, Focus, and maybe they were planning for this. That's probably why it came out mid-March versus the summer, for example. Although I do think this would have been a really fun summer film.
Agreed.
But they probably foresaw, whether it be through test screenings or whatever the case may be, that this wasn't going to have an immediate impact at the box office. So get it out there, see how much you can do in a few weeks.
Kind of test the market a little bit.
Test the market a little bit. Get some intrigue, because we do live in a world where this is the kind of film that most people are going to wait to see on VOD anyway, in streaming, wherever this lands.
Well, and if it gets an audience that way, I don't know how much this will cost Focus Features, but I've seen instances where a movie starts to get its audience in a VOD setting. It gets word of mouth, and then producers and production companies start to think, let's put a re-release in here. It's not too late to try one of these. If that word of mouth is there, then people start bringing their friends to an event-like spectacle to see this movie again. And maybe that's a potential narrative for a movie like this.
Yeah, and to, I guess, give further credence to what we're talking about, this only released in 2,700 theaters. That is not a full wide release.
Right.
That is about half of what a major release really is. So that does suggest that Focus Features is slowly rolling this out, planning that it's probably going to make up most of that margin on the VOD market. And after 6-8 months or so, it will probably land on some sort of streaming service. And that could catch fire even further.
Absolutely.
And so by the end of the year, it could be a big win. And that's probably what they're banking on, is the back end of it.
It's a fair way to bank. You know, that's kind of the old-fashioned way of doing movies, right?
Yeah. And I say all that to say, I hope that is the case, and I hope it ends up being a big win for Focus Features in the end, because, man, it's such a great movie.
A special movie. I think it's a special movie.
I love it a lot.
I know we're not quite at the midpoint of the year, but I wouldn't be surprised if it... I mean, let me say it this way. I would be surprised if it isn't my favorite movie of the year when we get to our midpoint, our mid review that we do in June or July.
Yeah, totally fair. A lot to see still, but the two Soderberghs are my 1 and 2 at this point, respectively.
Me too. I'm not gonna lie. Yeah.
So.
If that's the case when we get to our mid-year report, we might have to throw 6 films in there and just give him the tie to first place. Just say our favorite movie of the year so far is President's Black Bag.
Yeah. But we'll see. Brendan and I are not festival goers, so we haven't seen Sundance. We haven't seen South by yet.
Right.
A lot of those films will trickle out over the next several months, and who knows, maybe we'll catch up with a few of those. Things could change. We'll see.
Yeah, we shall see.
All right. Let's go ahead and transition to our animated segment here. And again, to reiterate, using Snow White, the live action Snow White that just hit theaters, that is our inspiration. So we're going to be talking about animated movies that we would like to see, or perhaps like to see, as live action. Now, look, I think we've gotten to a point where I might be at, like, my central thesis here might be leave all of these as animated movies. Let's forgo the whole remake era altogether.
We have to be careful with this topic that this is not a full-on defense of what Disney is doing. It's not that at all.
No, not that in any way, shape, or form. But hey, look, we're just using the remake era as inspiration, just something to talk about. And if they're going to do this, let's talk about the animated films that could transition to live action in theory. And the reason we use caution there, because as we noted, we've done this already once before.
Didn't go over very well, did it?
We did a top 3, and I want to go through our list here because there are films on this list that have been released or will be released soon, and I have regrets.
Looking at your list right now, JD, you have one particular regret I can't wait to hear from you.
But it speaks to execution, because I still love the idea. The idea is great. It all comes down to who you hire, what your plan of attack is. Now, before we get to my list or yours, when we did this originally, we had a guest on the show, the great Brent Allen. We love Brent. And I want to bring up his list because
it's hilarious.
It is kind of funny. And Brent isn't here to defend himself, so I'm not going to give him a hard time. I think he would defend at least one of these. I know he would really defend. I don't know how he feels about number 1 on his list. But his 1, 2, 3, respectively, are Aladdin, which had not come out yet, Frozen, and Mulan, which had not come out yet when we first did this. Obviously, 2 of those 3s have had a live action release since then. I know Brent is a big fan of Mulan. So no regrets from him on that front. And I noted this actually on social media over the weekend. If you follow me on Twitter, I will go to bat for Mulan. I don't think it's a great movie. It does stumble for sure. But what I love about Mulan is that it is absolutely nothing like its animated counterpart. It is a full-on re-envisioning, which is what I think these films should be. I will take 1,000 Mulans over any Lion King any day of the week.
Same here.
I want these films to do something new and different, take these bold swings, and I think Mulan does that. And I think visually it's quite engrossing. The action sequences are really good and invigorating and, again, different. But it does stumble. It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination.
Mulan kind of sits next to something like Cruella for me, where I think where it gets by more than anything else is the fact that unlike most of these live action remakes, those movies still feel like I'm watching a movie. There's at least an effort put into the cinematics, if you will, of them, which I can't really say about most of these. Those movies actually felt like they were kind of going for something movie-like, and I have to praise them for that.
Yes, exactly. And so I really like Mulan. I will go to bat for that. I don't know how Brent feels about Aladdin. Aladdin is one of those Disney remakes that I think regurgitates its formula more than it's trying to be inspired. However, there is the Guy Ritchie element of it that does come through at times, which I do admire. And they do recontextualize Jasmine in some sequences that I do think are great. So the new stuff they add, I do think are really good. I just don't think there's enough of it.
No,
That's
no.
my biggest problem with that movie.
It's a tug of war of a movie, and most of these live action remakes have been kind of this tug of war between nostalgia and newness, and I think that tug of war is most severely felt in Aladdin. If there is any major redeeming qualities with that particular version of Aladdin, it really does come down to Naomi Scott. I think she's just terrific.
Oh, she's really great. No,
Yeah.
I completely agree. And yeah, I love the additional qualities they add to Jasmine and some of her motives. The twist there is really great. And I will give Will Smith a lot of credit. That was a daunting task to follow Robin Williams.
Sure.
And I think he's really good in that role. So I do want to give him credit there. You're right that it is a struggle. I think it's
Yeah.
more of a fundamental struggle with that film. I don't think it's the worst case scenario. To me, that will always be The Lion King because that is shot for shot the same thing
It is.
and
Yeah.
worse.
Yeah.
Even worse in execution.
I agree.
At least Aladdin attempts to do something interesting.
I feel like the biggest praise we can give most of these movies is if they at least try something. And
Yeah.
so sadly not enough of them are trying things. It's why we
No.
at least gave some positive thoughts on Mufasa from last year. We didn't
Yeah,
think it was that
exactly.
great of a movie, but that movie at least tries stuff.
At least tries.
And yeah, I appreciate that.
All right. And then quickly to get through these other ones, because we do need to start talking about these new animated films that we're going to pitch as
Yeah.
far as a live action film goes. The third film on Brent's list is Frozen. That is inevitable. That is going to be a live action film at some point. So he will
Yeah.
be 3 for 3 at one
He
point.
will be. Yeah, that's a scary
Probably
thought.
sooner rather than later. As far as my list, I had number 1, The Iron Giant, number 2, How to Train Your Dragon, and 3, The Wind Rises. And look, I love How to Train Your Dragon. It is really, really great. That animated film, I think, is all-time stuff. The new live action film looks major yikes. I am not excited for it at all.
That's why these words we used at the beginning of this exercise are so important, quote unquote, in theory.
In theory, because again, How to Train Your Dragon, the new film that's coming out, looks to be DreamWorks' version of The Lion King. It looks shot for shot the same. They brought back the same director. Obviously, the cast is different, but the look, the feel, it is all the animated movie. And
Gerard Butler's coming back,
Gerard
playing
Butler,
the
except
father
he-
figure, like James Earl Jones coming back for The Lion King. It's a very similar
exactly.
form of stunt casting.
Yes, and I am not excited for it at all. If I want to see that version, I'm just going to go watch the animated film. John Powell is coming back. We should note that because Hans Zimmer came back to do The Lion King as well.
Yeah.
What about that tells you that this is going to be new and different and they're going to do something, like have their own take on this?
I don't see anything new or
I
different.
don't see anything about this new live action film that is inspired at all.
I'm scared. I'm so
but
scared.
I still maintain that if done right, if given a new invigorating version or like vision for it, that could translate to live action very well.
It could.
I think the idea of that film in live action, I do love the idea, but boy, they blundered the execution for this new one.
We obviously haven't seen it yet, but we have no faith that we're going to
I
be
have no
surprised
faith.
by this one. I don't
I
have
have
any
no
faith either. I really don't.
So those are my 3, and then Brendan's 3 are The Good Dinosaur, The Fox and the Hound, and Treasure Planet. Good job, Brendan. 0 for 3.
One of these is bound to get remade at some point. We may even talk about some of these during this exercise, but I will say right off the bat, if there's one on this list that I would remove, that I would no longer want to see in quote unquote live action, it's The Good Dinosaur, simply because as I think about it further, how do you pull that off without it being animated? Because basically the only difference is CGI animation or CGI dinosaurs in a live action setting. I feel like that's the only way to get around it. So what's different about that? There's
Well,
not really much different.
I will say, I'm not sure the name of it. Sam used to watch this show. Because like those nature documentaries that you see
Yeah.
all the time.
What was it, like Walking with Dinosaurs or something like that?
Yeah,
or
something like that. It
Yeah.
was built around that same idea that you see with all the Nat Geo documentaries. It was just rendered with CGI dinosaurs, but it was the same structure and style with the same
Mhm.
narrator talking about these dinosaurs and how they interact. If you did it in that kind of vein where it's photorealistic, there's no dialogue, and you just follow the same, format fundamentally, and it's a Wall-E type adventure with,
And
no dialogue, and it's a silent
Yeah.
film essentially, I
Well,
wouldn't mind that at all.
you're
I think
you're
that could be fun.
you're kind of sparking a bit of nostalgia in me, or at least you're taking me back to that conversation we must have had when we first did this exercise back in whatever it was, 2017, I'm guessing is when it was, because I
think
must
that's
have
what it
made
was.
the argument that I would have liked to see it as some form of a nature documentary where it was an
Yeah.
unspoken film. It was a silent film, essentially. Because that is still to this day my biggest problem with The Good Dinosaur. I think the first maybe half of it is actually pretty compelling until it becomes too governed by its story. And
Yeah.
that's where it starts to lose itself. And that certainly makes sense given the production history and how troubled it was. But I think that may have been my argument for putting it at number one,
Yeah.
is that I think there's a way to do it that does mirror that type of Walking with Dinosaurs nature documentary type thing, which could have been potentially interesting. Again, in theory, will never
Yeah,
happen.
and-
It might happen. I don't know. Everything's possible at this point.
But you're also talking to one of the most passionate Fantasia fans on the planet. I love
I
that
love
movie.
Fantasia. What a movie.
I love that movie, and
We're
what
never going to
is
get
so-
anything like that again.
And one of the best elements of it is that dinosaur sequence,
Mhm.
which is dialogue-less. It's basically what we're talking about here, except it is animated in that context.
Mhm.
But you make it live action in that style, that structure, and you're engrossed by what's happening. It is heartbreaking. It's devastating. Like, you feel for it. Like, there's so much emotion in that sequence. You could translate that with today's technology into a photorealistic visual sense and capture the same kind of emotions that film does. And that was 1940, I believe.
It was
when that film
1940.
came
Yeah,
out.
same year as
Yeah.
Pinocchio.
Yeah, wild. So, like, don't tell me it's not possible. I would watch the hell out of that.
I would
okay?
too. Sure, it wouldn't
I
do
would
very
watch
well
the-
in the
yeah.
box office, but I'd watch it.
I would watch it. And yes, to reiterate, it was episode 213. This is 629 for context. Episode 213, this was 2017, 8 years ago, and it was when Beauty and the Beast came out.
Okay, that
When
makes
we
sense.
did that original list.
Makes sense.
So
All right.
we were
All
right
right.
on that.
Yep. I will say before we get to the essence of this exercise we're about to have, for my other two picks, I would maybe stand by those, especially with the Fox and the Hound. I actually can see that. And I think I talked about this when we did this exercise back on episode 213. I think I talked about how it could almost mirror like an old Yeller, like eco fable of sorts. But instead of something like the Lady and the Tramp live action remake, let's actually not do the CGI route when you actually have animals on screen. Let's, let's keep things, do it like an indie film of sorts. You can make that movie as emotionally stirring as that animated film was by making it on the cheap. You can absolutely get
Yeah.
away with that. And
I agree.
again, in theory, that's the whole, basis of this exercise, I guess.
No, yeah, I agree. All right, so let's move on to the next phase of this, where we're going to discuss other animated films that we might want to see as live action. We'll narrow it down to a 5 that we are then going to pitch to Hollywood. Now, as we begin this, I have a couple of trios here.
Okay.
I have kind of narrowed down select films in kind of a thematic order.
Okay. I'm curious what you
The-
have here.
First trio of films that I have here. And look, I'm just going to throw this out there right now. No major studio is going to say yes to this, but maybe we can convince an A24 or a Neon or who knows, maybe a ketchup, given their recent name in the news.
Oh man, they might be the new A24 or the new Neon at this point.
Perhaps.
They're saving Looney Tunes from us.
Exactly. Those are the studios that we're probably aiming for with this first three, because they are not going to be commercial. These are going to be films that I am simply dubbing the child death trio. Okay? Now, stick with me for a second.
Well, that's not morbid at all. I'm curious about this one now.
No, it is morbid. It's very morbid. That's why we're aiming.
I know. It's the beauty of
for a neon
sarcasm.
here. But I have a trio of films that I think would work really great as live action. And they all center around children learning, coping with death in some sort of way. The first one is maybe the most obvious. It is Grave of the Fireflies. This is a film that could easily be translated to live action. Now, watching children die over the course of 2 hours is not going to be marketable, which again, Disney's not going to buy this one up, but maybe we can convince A24. An all-time movie, though. An all-time movie with a message that will never cease to be irrelevant. That will always be a relevant topic, what that film is about. It is devastating, and I think would work great in a live-action format. The second one, and these other two films are a little less known, but thematically similar. The next one is one of the best overlooked movies of the last 10 years. The Red Turtle is another one.
I could see that one.
And this one could work great in live action because the animated film is overlooked. So it would, in a lot of ways, feel new. It would hopefully inspire more people to go out and see the animated film. Because when people see the trailer for that, they won't recognize it as an adaptation. Because the Red Turtle is simply an overlooked movie. But that film, I think, would translate very well to live action. And then the third film is Song of the Sea, which uses a lot of folklore. I think you could. This one will have a little bit more vigor to it, especially if the way you include the folklore, the music of that film. I think is really great. It's still tragic. There's still a deep pathos to it for sure. Again, it's all about children coping with death. So it still thematically fits, but that one would have at least have a little bit more energy than the other two. But those three films, as much as I love them as animated films, and I deeply, deeply love those three animated movies. Yeah. I would venture to see them in a live action format.
I would be curious. I think all three could certainly translate to a live action setting. In fact, Grave of the Fireflies has been adapted a few times to live action, at least in the Japanese market, to a few TV movies, if I'm not mistaken. It is based on a pretty popular Japanese novel, so I can understand that process happening there. Of the three that you mentioned there, I actually did have one on my list to at least talk about, and one of them was Song of the Sea. I actually do think that would be a great, vibrant reinterpretation in that particular setting. So if I were to say one of those three that you listed there would be my choice, it would be Song of the Sea. I feel like that makes the most sense, and at the same time, like I can kind of see the Red Turtle working as well. At least, like basically treat it as like if Castaway and Tom Hanks interacted with a turtle instead of Wilson. You kind of have a similar vibe there. So we know it could work with the right talent behind the camera. Song of the Sea, I think, is a great choice, though. But when I say great choice, again, we have to be very careful with how we phrase this. In theory, but we're also saying we are not wanting to see these movies in live action necessarily. We're not saying it would be the preferred version. We're just saying that, if this trend were to continue, here's maybe how they can do it better.
Let's get interesting with this, right? Because all we've seen is Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin and like all the classics, The Little Mermaid. Let's get interesting with this. That's all that
Yeah.
I'm saying.
Yeah.
The next trio I have, and then I'll relent to you to name a few yourself.
Okay.
And this is blasphemy. I know. Trust me, I am fully aware that the movies I'm about to say, full on blasphemous from a cinephile critic perspective. Nobody wants to see these translated to live action. And honestly, I don't know exactly if they would. It would take some imagination and some invention, but
Yeah.
with the right filmmaker, that could work. And I think in live action could be really, really compelling as a sci-fi, fantastical experience.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now I want to lay the groundwork before people start throwing tomatoes at me, and I'm already sick, so please don't.
I won't. Don't worry.
All right, my next trio here is Hayao Miyazaki. Okay,
Ouch.
just wait.
Ouch.
Just wait a moment. Just wait a second. Okay. Now, not all of Hayao Miyazaki could translate easily. However, these three, I think, could. At least two of the three. The third one might be pushing it, but there's a bias I'll get to. The first one is Kiki's Delivery Service. There is a fantastical element to it. We're all familiar with something like Harry Potter. So, like the witch wizard aspect of it.
It's
is something
basically
we all know very well.
It's basically Sabrina the Teenage Witch.
Sabrina the Teenage Witch. That's another great comp as well. So that one I think would be the most commercial of the three.
Mm-hmm.
Now this next one has some incredible fantastical elements, but look, we've seen great live action fantasy before, so we know it's very much possible. It is arguably Miyazaki's best movie. It is Princess Mononoke. And look, as much as I love that animated film, there is something guttural in me when I think about the character on the wolf kind of standing on a mountaintop, like that visual in live action with some sort of thunderous score behind it. Kind of raises the hair on my neck a little bit.
I can't do it. I can't do it.
It's pretty cool.
I can't do it. I can't do it. I'm sorry. I can't.
Look, I think that would be pretty great. So like I would be intrigued by it for sure. Again, I'm not saying any of these would top the masterpieces that Miyazaki made. I'm not saying that at all, but I think that in live action could be cool. And then the other one is Porco Rosso. And I think I just want to see those dogfighting sequences in live action. I think is kind of the motive there. But I think it would be kind of fun, to have this pig character. Now, obviously, that would be CGI, but amongst a real life setting otherwise, I think could be really interesting. And I just want to see those dogfights. So that's my Miyazaki or Ghibli 3.
Okay.
I know it's blasphemous. I know. Trust me, I'm aware.
I did have 2 Miyazaki films on my list, and none of them were the ones you mentioned.
Well, okay. So we're just doing a full-on Miyazaki here.
Well,
okay.
I guess we're on the Miyazaki topic. Yeah, I those 3 would kind of worry me a little bit, primarily because if I'm going to disregard the fact that they are so great as their own movies already, if I'm going to phrase this as an exercise around coming up with a pitch of which ones we think should be done in live action, given the whole scope of this Hollywood epidemic of adapting animated films into live action, I'd want to pitch ones that I feel like wouldn't be too comparable to other live action movies that already exist. And I feel like Princess Mononoke and Kiki's Delivery Service already have those comparisons. You mentioned Harry Potter, Sabrina the Teenage Witch. With Princess Mononoke,
Sure.
It's a universal story that's already similar to the likes of Dances with Wolves and Pocahontas and Avatar. So there are comparables we can make there already. So I feel like that work has already kind of been done. Porco Rosso is the most interesting one, I think, there. But if we're keeping it to Miyazaki, the ones I'm going to pick are the ones that I think have the best chance of either reinterpreting the material or even bettering the material. The big one being Howl's Moving Castle. I that's the one I would say of his filmography I would like to see done again, primarily because I just don't think that movie works in its current setting. Narratively speaking, at least, I think it's a very expansive and elaborate novel that needs more than just the animation landscape to capture all of its maneuvering qualities for that story to fully make sense. So that's one I thought about. Or take it back to the beginning. His first movie, Lupin the Third, The Castle of Cagliostro, or whatever it's called,
Okay.
something like that. See, I think some of those could be potentially interesting.
Yeah, I don't think I can speak to the Castle of Cagliostro or what, however you say that. I don't know.
I mispronounce it every time.
House Moving Castle. I mean, you make a good argument. I'm just apathetic on it.
Well, that's the thing. It's like I guess maybe this is where our criterias are a little bit different. The animated movies that I'm apathetic on are the ones I'm going to pitch. Those are the ones I want to see get done because like that's the opportunity to do something with it.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think that's fair because like I don't love that film. I think you could expand on it. I also feel like that would be the trickier of his filmography to translate that to live action because it is so super fantastical. But if in the hands of the right person, like Peter Jackson doing Lord of the Rings, he was the right guy for that.
He was, yeah.
If you find that lightning in a bottle, then yeah, I mean, you can easily make that better than the animated film for sure. But that would be a hard sell, I think, and that is part of the exercise here.
Well, that you're right. That's a hard sell because that is still a film that has its fan base. When I talk about, I feel like there's a new interpretation of that movie that could make it better. I'm one of the few people, perhaps, that feels that way.
Yeah, I mean, and look, none of these films are going to be easy sells. I talked about 3 films and trying to pitch them to Neon or A24. So like,
and they're probably not listening.
Yeah, I mean, no one's gonna make Grave of the Fireflies a live action. It's hard enough of a sell just to get people to watch the animated film. But I do think when you're talking about Miyazaki, it will be easier to pitch some of these others. Because the other thing with, well, I don't know. I was gonna bring up an argument, and I think it kind of counteracts some of the choices that I made. Yeah, I mean. Yeah, I'm apathetic, so I will leave the pitching to you on that one. I do not necessarily care to see a House Moving Castle in live action, but if it comes out and it gets good reviews, then yeah, I will be there. I will gladly go see it and hope that it's better than the animated film, which I do not care all that much about. Kind of the same thing with Ponyo. I don't hate Ponyo by any stretch of the imagination. But I think you could turn that into a better live action film for sure.
Yeah, maybe. There is something about the animated qualities of that movie that I would probably want those to hold more true than something like Howl's Moving Castle, which is why I added Howl to my list specifically over Ponyo. But I think similar things can be said about both movies that I think overall, I think they're narratively flawed. They're lesser Miyazaki for me and maybe could be they could be argued for reinterpretation at some point.
I still think the only reason I haven't brought it up is because it was on my original list and I didn't want to regurgitate the same 3 that I did before. I still think the best film on here though is The Wind Rises for several reasons. One, it really isn't, even though it should, I would argue, I think it should be considered one of his best masterpieces. I don't think its legacy is there yet, but it doesn't have the same reputation as Princess Mononoke. It doesn't have the reputation of Spirited Away or even Kiki's Delivery Service or Totoro. So you won't have nearly as much pushback by translating that to live action. That's one element. The other element of it is it's one of his least fantastical movies. So in terms of a budget, you don't have to do a lot of crazy CGI to make the world come to life. It is set in World War II Japan. That is easy to replicate. You can do that on a normal budget. You have the dream sequences and some of the flying sequences. That's going to be your biggest budgetary concerns, but you can do that, especially through today's CGI, rather easily. And the story of that film is deeply romantic. It obviously gets tragic and heartbreaking, but it's ultimately a drama set in World War II that is easy to redo today on a fair budget without getting too crazy, given the premise of that film. So it's set up, it's super ripe for live action comparatively to some of these others.
You
as
don't
well.
even you don't even need to go as big as something like The Aviator, Martin Scorsese's
Yeah,
film, with that
exactly.
one. Out of all of Miyazaki's films, I feel like that's the one, The Wind Rises, kind of makes the most sense because there's
makes the
room.
most sense, yeah.
It has the most room to just tell the same story, and yet somehow it'll still feel completely differentiated from its animated counterpart.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, honestly, the more we talk about that, as much as I love that film, that might be the one that I would most pitch from Miyazaki's
I
filmography,
agree.
actually.
I mean, honestly, and maybe we, forget that it was on my list originally. Maybe
We just kind of
add
trip
to
back
this
over it. I
anyway.
love that.
Because honestly, like, I picked the other three because I'm trying to be fun and different, and honestly, being a little bold. I get, like, asking to remake Princess Mononoke. You're gonna make a lot of people upset with that.
We're
And I
going to lose
get
a
it.
lot of listeners here.
I get it, but I think seeing that wolf in live action and some of the drama and the fantastical elements of that film, I think could be really fun in a big Lord of the Rings kind of way. Obviously done through the lens of Miyazaki, of course. I think that could be really compelling. But I still think the film that makes the most sense is The Wind Rises. And honestly, it's not even close when it comes to Miyazaki, for sure.
Honestly, I wouldn't be opposed to putting that on our 5 if we come up with a
Yeah.
collective 5 that we're happy with this final pitch.
Yeah. All right. What else you
yeah.
got?
Well,
I know you have a few others.
let's talk about Disney specifically, because when we talk about Disney doing live action remakes to their own property, I feel like for those of us in the film critic circle, we're all saying the same thing. Go back to the bad movies. What are some of your failures that you can do again? And that's
Okay.
why I think many people have said these movies already. I'm gonna say them again. So I feel like I'm kind of a broken record for many people already having this conversation. But movies like The Sword in the Stone, The Black Cauldron, Atlantis: The Lost Empire, these are ones that I think already have intriguing narratives behind them. There's room for some really interesting visual intrigue that many filmmakers out there already know how to tap into. But most of these movies came out at a time when Disney as a animated company was kind of at a breaking point. The Black Cauldron in particular, I think that was in 1985, if I'm not mistaken. The 80s were a rough time for Disney. They were a very rough time.
Yeah.
Very rough. That's a very rough movie. I don't think it's a very good movie, but I see potential there. Atlantis: The Lost Empire also came at a time when Disney was sort of at its breaking point. Really, their last proper animated movie was The Emperor's New Groove, which already had a huge production issue leading up to that one. That movie completely reshaped and in many ways kind of marked the end of the Disney Renaissance. But
Yeah.
Atlantis: The Lost Empire, I think, is one that does at least have a compelling narrative and an interesting visual palette that could be tapped into in some way that could perfect that story going forward. So
Yeah.
that's why those three there, and I'm not saying all three have to be on our list, but I think these are the types of movies that Disney should be looking at. It's why Pete's Dragon works so well. That's why it's still probably the best of the Disney live action remakes, because they took a bastard child of the Disney canon and gave it new life. And these are ones I think that deserve it.
Well, I mean, I think part of the new life is getting the right filmmaker in there and letting him create magic the way they did. So it'll come down to execution and approach, as is the case with all of these movies. The Black Cauldron, I think there's potential there. Again, apathetic when it comes to something like that. Atlantis, though, I think is interesting because that movie is founded on something that just generally is constantly in the zeitgeist. People are always going to be fascinated by the idea of Atlantis. I think you have to be careful to avoid politics with that film. And what I mean by that is there are a lot of crazy ass conspiracy theories out there right now that have created some really heated discourse. So I would avoid that at all cost and just create your own little fun Atlantis movie. Like, I don't completely dislike the animated film, but I think in terms of live action, there's certainly a lot of promise with that film for sure. I would have absolutely, I would be there for that one. No doubt. No doubt about it.
Of the three I just mentioned there, now there are more we could probably throw in there that are part of the lesser tier Disney canon that could benefit from a live action remake. But of those three examples I laid out there, I think Atlantis would probably be the one I pitch first, primarily because, just realistically speaking, it is the most contemporary of the three. It's the most bankable, perhaps, maybe the one that is still most top of mind and getting the right audience to go, especially for those of us who are maybe around our age that were still relatively kids, teenagers when that movie first came out, which will certainly give us a curiosity to see it in the first place. And many of us are parents now, so we'll be able to bring our own kids to that. So I think that's the one that also makes the most sense simultaneously. But I think just given the steampunk vibe of it, that's something I like to see in a live action setting. I think that just translates really well if you have the right people working on it. And I'd be intrigued by that. I would be intrigued by that one.
Yeah, I would be intrigued by Atlantis as well. And the other one I think would be Treasure Planet. I think there's a largeness to that film. Yeah. And it's relatively obscure like Atlantis comparatively to some of these others as well, that you have an opportunity to kind of turn that into like a Pirates of the Caribbean kind of thing.
It's funny you say that, because I was also about to add that Treasure Planet was on my list when we did this back in 2017, but I was going to say Treasure Planet and Atlantis, those two movies can kind of make this weird partnership of sorts. I think they are aesthetically similar. Which is why if you tapped into someone like Gore Verbinski to make these, I would do Atlantis and Treasure Planet. I would be first in line for that.
Yeah, all right, that's one way to hook me. Yeah, you get Gore Verbinski to do those two movies, and I am totally there day one. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, I think that would be really cool.
That'd be a fun thing to add to this pitch. Is do we want to add directors to this?
I mean, honestly, so much of this is going to come down to execution.
Yeah.
Look, I love Dean DuBois. Maybe he can create magic given the limitations for How to Train Your Dragon. I don't know. Maybe he wasn't the right person for the live action version. I don't know.
It felt like a safe choice.
Yes, it very much did. I mean, his hands were tied. Like I have no doubt that they hired him and told him, we want you to verbatim do the animated film.
Well, it's that, but it's also like picking him also feels like a marketing ploy, because now, now they can market this film as from the same mind as How to Train Your Dragon. Just like when The Lion King came out, 2019, they were at least able to market that as from the same mind as The Jungle Book. So they had a marketing ploy with the director that they picked. That's really the only reason why they picked Dean for it.
Yeah. I don't disagree. I think that's probably the case. I mean, I guess if I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt, if they said, hey, you can do a live action version of How to Train Your Dragon, do whatever you want. No red tape whatsoever. I want to say that he's smart enough and creative enough that he could do that in a way that is distinctive. If I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt, just given what I know about that trilogy and how great it is, he probably could render something new and different, but maintaining the same spirit. It feels like a mandate from above.
It does.
But hiring him for sure gives them a marketing edge. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
All right, sticking with Disney/Pixar.
Oh.
And this, I guess, circles back to your theme of films that you don't necessarily love and that I think you can make improvements on. But I think given what it is, it also just translates well to live action because there is a fantastical element of it for sure.
I think I know where you're going with this one.
You're going to have to figure out the animalistic angle of it. But I think of something like Brave, for example.
Oh gosh, yeah, I'm with you. This is also on my list.
Yeah, I don't love that film at all. Like that film winning the Oscar is one of my favorite, or like one of what like it's the Oscar. When I think about the animated category, especially, I get the most angry at because Wreck-It Ralph I think is 1,000 times better than that film. Like it's not even close.
I agree with that.
And Brave winning, but I think like fundamentally, like what Brave is trying to accomplish, I love. It
has the most potential. The most potential.
It has tons of potential.
Yeah.
So like that as a live action, you know, again, I'd be curious how you work around the bear element of it, but I still think there's a lot of potential there as live action.
That was on my list as well. In fact, I would kind of push for that one because I'm with you on Brave. It's a movie I want to like more than I do. Like of all the Pixar films that they've done, there are two Pixar films that I keep trying to like more and I just can't quite get there. Brave is one of them. The other one is Soul for very different reasons.
Yeah.
That's a movie I want to love, but Brave is also a movie I want to love and I just don't think it gets there. And perhaps, you know, a fantastical live action setting could be something that grounds it a bit more. And I would love to see that translated, especially in the true like Scottish landscape, if you will. I'd be very intrigued by that.
Yeah, I would be intrigued by that as well. Another film that I had on my list, this is Disney, going back to Disney specifically. Big Hero 6. I think could be really fun because again, that one translate, you have the robot element of it. And you know, it kind of fits into, you know, it has these great themes of family. It's got, I guess, like some like high, you know, sci-fi elements to it that I think could translate very well, while still being fun and playful and family friendly and all those sort of things. So I think that one translates very well. And I do like that animated film, but I think that one could work great as live action.
I agree. I like it. I don't love that one. I think it's a fine animated movie. But I think that's one that I could certainly see working as kind of a modern superhero movie, which is a scary thing to say, given the landscape of superhero movies now. That's probably not the best way to pitch something like that. But I could, you know, see a better version of it there for sure.
For sure. All right. Are there any others? Because we do need to try to get to a list here.
I know. Yeah, we got to round this out.
We got to round it out. So just quickly, do you want to list off a few more?
Two others. I will go back to my original top three that I did back in 2017 and once again throw out The Fox and the Hound. I can kind of see that working as like an indie eco fable of sorts. Imagine if that was directed by the Lee Isaac Chung of Minari. I could see something like that working. The last one I'll throw out here, and this is another one that I think has been part of the conversation among those in our film Twitter sphere, if you will, of ones that could benefit from a live action remake. And that's the movie Anastasia, which I'm sure you've heard of.
Yep. Yeah, I got this on my list. Yep.
Yeah. I'm not sure if this is one I'm clamoring for because I think the animated film on its own terms kind of works. And I know that there's been, I think, a stage musical as well that's also very successful. So there's so much about this story that exists in other mediums that doesn't really necessarily warrant a live action interpretation, or at least it doesn't seem to need it as much as some of these others. But I at least wanted to acknowledge it, that I think it's an interesting movie that was certainly trying to be a Disney Renaissance movie and didn't quite get there. But I think there are good things in it that could certainly translate to a live action setting for sure. But maybe not necessarily one that I would pitch.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I do have it on my list, so I do think it's at least worth bringing it up. Another film that I want to bring up, and this is going to perhaps be out of the blue. I would seriously consider this for the pitch, though. even though
Mm.
it's not a highly regarded film. In fact, I just looked up its Rotten Tomato score. It's got like a 55. So it's not well received critically. Audiences probably can take it or leave it as well. The real story that it is inspired by, though, is incredible. People love dogs. They love a good dog movie. I would highly consider Balto as a live action film. I think that's
a
something.
great choice.
I think that's something you could do in a great way. You know, especially with the way they can train animals to be on screen as well. I don't even know if I brought this up on the show, but in the last few months, I watched this YouTube video where someone was breaking down the science behind using dogs in film. And I was like, I'm going to watch this because I find that so fascinating. They, of course, brought up the John Wick films, and that was really incredible. They were going through all of that. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, please do it. Please do it. Not sure if they were going to or not because I've never seen this person's channel before. And they did it. They brought up a white god. And not only did they bring up white god, it was like prominent in the video. Like it was one of the best examples of how to use dogs in film. I'm like, yes, exactly.
Well,
like,
and there's a human component to that movie. So you have Kevin Bacon who voiced Balto himself in the animated movie, but you do it in live action, you don't necessarily need, an animalistic quality to drive it.
that's the thing. Like, obviously, you can have like a real person there. You can have real people in the movie, but yeah, you can have a white god-esque kind of movie, at least at times. Now, again, we want this to be commercial, but we don't need a talking dog. You don't need talking animals. But the way White God captures that dog and his emotions, it is deeply visceral. It is incredible what they were able to pull off cinematically with that performance.
I could totally see something like this being directed by, say, like Carol Ballard, who directed movies like The Black Stallion or Fly Away Home.
Sure.
Oh my God. Okay, this is on our 5. This is on our 5. I threw out my pitch for The Fox and the Hound for kind of the same reasons, but I think a movie like this makes more sense because it doesn't have as much of a fan base to argue against it.
Exactly.
Right?
It has, I think it's like everything that we've been talking about where, it's easily translatable. It's a story that is truly incredible. The real story is phenomenal.
Yeah.
Everyone loves a good dog movie. You can use current cinematic techniques to really capture a real performance out of the dog, but you can also have real people as well. I think this would work phenomenally as a live action film.
I think that's a great transition into trying to hone down our 5, our list that we would quote unquote pitch to Hollywood for this. Balto's on my list, already on my list.
Same here. And also, just throwing this out there as well, you could also get Spielberg. Just saying.
I'd see that. He did Warhorse already.
That's
so. I mean,
exactly
I was just going to say, think of something.
What I mean.
In some ways, Warhorse is kind of, what's it, Spirit, the Ballad of the Stallion.
Yeah. So Balto for sure. Did we want to include The Wind Rises in our 5?
Maybe. I'd say, given the conversation that we had, it seemed as though you and I were more passionate about the idea of Atlantis, the Lost Empire. At least as an idea. I mean, but at the same time, the Wind Rises kind of makes sense. So how about this? Balto, The Wind Rises, Atlantis, the Lost Empire, Brave. I feel like these are ones that I think already make the most sense given the conversation that we had. I'm happy with those 4 thus far.
Here's one, and we haven't talked about this one yet, and it's a little unfair because it's a documentary, so there is a real life component to it.
Okay.
But I think would work dramatically as well, especially if you maintain the same style and like the same structure as the documentary.
Okay.
But the documentary Tower came to mind. I think would have a great commercial appeal.
Yeah, that's a tough one. That's in such a gray area for me.
It is a gray
yeah.
area. Admittedly, it's a
Yeah.
gray area.
That-
but
that
it
might
came
be-
to mind.
That might be, that's a fair point. It might be a little too gray for me to come up with a decision on it so quickly. So I might have to,
Okay.
just for the sake of time, forgo that one. But I think that's an interesting choice, though.
All right, that's fair. Look, going back to the beginning of this, I still want to fight for Song of the Sea. The Red Turtle and Grave of the Fireflies, I'm willing to take the L's on. I wanted to bring those in because that trio just made sense to me and was fun. Song of the Sea, though, it is poignant, but there's so much more to that film that could be commercial. There's a lot of folklore. There's still a vibrancy to it. And you get a great cast in there where you're like really endeared by the children characters. You got a great father figure in there as well. People love a good father-daughter connection in a movie with the folklore. I think that one still has great appeal. That one I still fight for.
So Balto, The Wind Rises, Atlantis, The Lost Empire, Song of the Sea, and there was a fifth, and Brave.
And Brave, yeah.
I'm kind of happy with those 5. And I feel like, because I at least wanted to have one from the Disney canon to emphasize the narrative of Disney learning to do these better, right? And I think out of all of these past Disney efforts that maybe were not necessarily successes, I think Atlantis makes more sense than, let's say, The Sword in the Stone or The Black Cauldron. Actually, I feel like Atlantis could almost be this like double feature of sorts. We can almost pick that alongside Treasure Planet as like a dual pick or something like that.
Yeah. No, I think that 5 is great. So, I mean, you got the Disney, you got a Pixar, but we also went to Miyazaki and, we did spread the wealth a little bit, which is great.
Yeah.
And I do want to mention that Balto was produced by Amblin. So Spielberg is already familiar with that.
So Spielberg has no choice but to make it.
Yeah, just saying. The more I look at it, the more it just makes sense.
Like I said, he made Warhorse already, and you and I are huge defenders of that movie.
Yeah.
I actually think that's very underrated, Spielberg.
Exactly. I think that's a good 5. I think we can take this. We'll send it to Hollywood. Hopefully, someone will pick up, one of those movies. But I think those 5 are good. Let's see these animated films in live action. I think they would translate well.
I agree.
All right, Brennan, let's talk about NordVPN. For
Security.
those traveling, security, it is very, very important to be secure wherever you go around the globe. That's why we love NordVPN. So if you are traveling and you want to enjoy the benefits of your paid subscriptions from your home country at any place, at any time, you need NordVPN. It is very fast. It is secure. They are protecting users from prying eyes online by changing your IP address wherever you go. They secure traffic through encryption, making it hard to spy or hijack your data. This
That's so important.
is a vital piece of an app that you need to get.
And it's available to everyone, essentially. It's available on all operating systems, so you have no excuse to stay protected with regard to your data and everything that you hold true and safely. Smart TVs, all of their routers, their Threat Protection Pro feature helps to block all malware and various ads and malicious sites and other hackers as well. It was even picked the best VPN by PC Mag, Forbes, Wired, Tech Advisor, as well as many other outlets as well. So it means business.
Yes, with 7,200 servers in 118 countries, the options are endless. The speeds are remarkable. They don't track user activity. They have a customizable kill switch if anything is to go wrong or is disrupted. So they have your back at every turn. Got to go check it out. Use our link below in the description. You can find it in the description, whether you're on YouTube or listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Click the link, get your first month of NordVPN for free. And for the next few weeks, you can also get up to 70% off on select 2-year plans. So if you go to their website, check that out as well. But you got to get NordVPN. Stay secure out there wherever you go, especially if you come visit me in Florida.
There you go.
staying safe here is more important than ever.
Very important.
So go check out NordVPN, and we thank them for their support. All right, Brendan, there is one thing on this planet that I love almost as much as my children. Not quite, but close.
That is a heck of a bold statement. I hope your wife is not listening.
I probably not. I guess I can include her as well. But I love coffee. I love coffee more than anything on this planet. It is the best.
I think we
it's
all
what gets
do.
me through.
I'm guessing your wife does as well, so she has no right to judge you if that's the case.
Oh, she hates coffee.
Wow.
My wife
okay.
does not drink coffee, but my wife has the palate of a 3-year-old, which is why she gets
that's right.
along
She's a sweet
very
tooth.
well with the kids.
Yeah.
So, yeah, she eats chicken fingers, cheese pizza, and cheese quesadillas. Like, that's about as far as the palate goes.
Hey,
You know, we're trying to expand, but generally that's all she eats.
hey, we all have our things, right? For some of
Yeah.
us, it's caffeine. Sometimes we're addicts in that way. That's how we get our energy. But everyone has their thing.
Yes, exactly. For me, I love coffee. I need it. I thrive off of it. And if I'm going to drink coffee, I need to drink the best coffee. That's what I love so much about Coffee Cult, because they source specialty grade coffee. We're talking gourmet coffee beans from all over the world. They go through extra hoops to make sure that every green coffee bean they roast is of the highest caliber. They don't use any defects. They filter it all out in a very specific way. They, of course, roast it in a very specific way. So the flavors, the quality of the coffee is of the highest order. This is not your ordinary coffee. You cannot find this at your grocery store. You cannot find this at your highly named marts out there, shall we say, or bullseyes. You're not going to find it at any of those stores.
Nice way to be cryptic.
Thank you. Can't name drop. So you got to go to coffeecult.com. That's coffee with a K, cult with a K. Go to coffeecult.com. We're talking the best coffee in the world. Use our code ISF25. Again, that code is ISF25. Use that at checkout and get 15% off your order. It's one of the best discounts you'll get out there with Coffee Cult. So go take advantage. Take advantage of that discount.
So good. I need more Sumatra in my life.
Yeah, it's so good. I promise you're going to love it. Again, coffeecult.com, and we thank Coffee Cult for their support. Okay, with all of that said, that was really fun, but let's go ahead and transition to our Best Picture movie series. Very exciting that we are now looking at the 1964 film My Fair Lady. Brendan, had you ever seen My Fair Lady before this watch?
Okay, so in a past episode gearing up for this movie series, 1960s Best Picture winner specifically, I'm pretty sure I mentioned I had seen this before. And then I started watching it for this particular discussion we're about to have, and I didn't remember anything from it. So honestly, it may have been one that I saw at a very young age. And when I say very young age, I may have been like 4 or 5 years old or something like that. It may have been one of those films that my aunt showed me when I was really young. She was really big on some of these old movies. And when we spent some time with her up in Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania, we'd sometimes watch very old movies together. This may have been one of them, but it was so premature of me to say I remembered it. So I'm going to have to say it was a first-time watch because I really didn't remember anything outside of a few of its musical numbers, outside of a few of the songs themselves, which are certainly familiar given the history of the stage play and the musical itself.
Yeah, this was a first-time watch for me. I believe I noted this at the end of the show last week because I was very curious how it was going to fare in a lineup with Dr. Strangelove, Stanley Kubrick's masterpiece, and Mary Poppins. Another musical. We just got done talking about Disney a little bit in the previous segment. This is one of their most beloved films. And of course, if you know the history of My Fair Lady and Mary Poppins, there is a lot of irony with the lineup of the Oscars for 1964. I don't know how familiar you are with this, Brendan, but Julie Andrews, the beloved Julie Andrews, she was the original on Broadway. She was the original Eliza Doolittle being our protagonist in My Fair Lady.
How ironic.
Yep. And she was passed over. She was not happy that she was passed over for the film version for My Fair Lady. And so she goes on to do one Mary Poppins. And guess who won for Best Actress in the year 1964?
Oh, I know this. Yeah, of course it was
you
Julie
know.
Andrews, because clearly something was fueling her fire to give the best performance she could ever give, given these circumstances.
You could say she was a little inspired when she was on the set of Mary Poppins, because she gives one of her very, very best performances. And when you know that context, it does give it a little bit of an edge. She was very, very eager to win that Oscar, I think, to get a little bit of a pushback to the producers of My Fair Lady who passed her over. So that crossover, that irony, I just think is hilarious. I just love the behind the scenes narratives. Like, that's the kind of stuff I'm not into award season as much as others are. Obviously, I'm not an awards pundit by any stretch of the imagination, but that kind of drama would have been fascinating to.
I wish I was alive for that. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. That would have been incredible. And so, she wins for Mary Poppins. However, Audrey Hepburn ends up getting cast for this film version of My Fair Lady.
And from what I see, she wasn't even nominated for it.
And she was not nominated. People were very surprised by that from what I was reading. And if you do further reading, you'll notice that Rex Harrison did win the Oscar for Best Actor, Supporting Actor, whichever one it was for him. He won the Oscar, and he went on stage and said that he was dedicating it to his quote-unquote two fair ladies, because Rex Harrison was on stage originally with Julie Andrews. So he had done it on stage with Julie Andrews. Then he did the film with Audrey Hepburn, dedicated his Oscar to both of his fair ladies.
And it was leading actor. It was leading actor.
I figured, because he's the lead actor in this film. I didn't want to assume, because you never know with the awards campaigns. You just never know.
Yeah, it's all their category fraud has been a thing for as long as we can remember.
For a long time. All right. So with that out of the way, I thought that was some fun little pretext.
For sure.
But let's go ahead and jump into this. My Fair Lady is directed by George Cukor, and it stars Audrey Hepburn, Rex Harrison, Stanley Holloway, Wilfred Hyde White, Gladys Cooper, and the list goes on and on. If you're not familiar with My Fair Lady, in 1910's London, snobbish phonetics professor Henry Higgins agrees to a wager that he can make a crude flower girl, Eliza Doolittle, presentable to high society. All right. Let's go ahead and break that down.
I mean, Brendan. This is basically Pretty Woman, or She's All That. I mean, we can definitely see the inspiration that this would lead to various other romantic comedies at the very least.
For sure. Brendan, what did you think about My Fair Lady?
This is where it gets interesting, JD. And when I say gets interesting, I really mean in the context of us doing a movie series like this. We've talked about this many times, how movies can sometimes feel almost like they shape differently for you when you watch them in constant succession of either a director's own work or in some type of series like this. And when watching My Fair Lady, knowing that other movies from the 1960s, other movie musicals specifically, would go on to win Best Picture or at least get nominated, I think it changes how we can see a movie like My Fair Lady. And when I say we, I really mean you and I specifically. I can't speak to everyone. I thought this was really bad. I thought this was a really bad movie. I'm actually like, I was kind of shocked by that because I was really at least expecting or at least hoping for some type of extravagance, knowing the history of movies like West Side Story from the 60s winning Best Picture. We're going to talk about The Sound of Music in just a little bit. And whether you like that movie or not, you can't deny the grandness and the physicality of that movie. It's just so grand and lush and huge. And My Fair Lady is a 3-hour movie where I think as a musical, the staging is horrible. I was kind of shocked by that. So I don't think this works. We'll talk a lot more about the thematic undertones of this movie. I think in many ways, this is one of the worst aging Best Picture winners for a lot of reasons. And I don't even know if the movie's aware of what it really wants to say. Because from what I understand, the movie concludes in a way that's actually very different from the original stage play. This is loosely based off of Pygmalion. And the original story is actually concluded very differently. And for what I've seen, they conclude in the right way. I don't think this does at all. I think this is a pretty ugly movie. This really did not work for me. And if I'm going to make a really harsh comment here, if I look at all the Best Picture winners that have ever won this award, this might be my least favorite one.
Wow.
I think it's that
okay.
bad. I think it's
We're
really
starting off
bad.
hot.
I think it's
Man.
really bad. This is really bad. This is at the very
incredible.
At the very least, I think this is my least favorite Best Picture winner we've ever discussed in a main review setting on this show.
Okay. Wow, that is so interesting. All right, as I noted, this was a first time watch for me, and after watching it, as one does, I immediately thought of Honora. But
as everyone does, because every time I watch a movie, I just think about Honora.
Exactly. But I found My Fair Lady to be the anti-Honora in the sense that Eliza is strung along the whole movie. It's a bit prickly, to your point. It's ugly. But how does the film use that to its advantage? Well, it failed to stick the landing. That's why it's the anti-Honora. Now, films don't have to be moral. They don't need to be, but there is a lot to be said about execution and storytelling. There is something hollow about My Fair Lady and how it tackles classism, misogyny, and gender dynamics without wrestling with any of those things or having anything to say. Its premise is obviously gross, and Higgins is despicable. All things that would be compelling if the film and the material did anything interesting with them. Much like Honora, I kept waiting for the shoe to drop. When it does in Honora, not only does it recontextualize the film, it becomes one of the very best moments of last year. That final scene, it hits like a gun punch. It's fantastic.
Thought it was the scene of the year.
With My Fair Lady, that last scene has the opposite effects. The final moment and reversal that we see there is illogical. It is off-putting. Eliza's choice in the end completely undermines any meaningful grappling the film had done with its themes, which wasn't much to begin with, but that final moment just completely breaks everything apart. Somewhat similar to what we talked about last year with Emilia Perez. Emilia Perez could have been compelling if it just cared at all to grapple with its problems, and it just doesn't. This is another film that sets up a lot of boorish, prickly behavior and just throws it away. Just doesn't care to address it at all. And that, to me, is why this film does not age all that well. I completely agree with you. In the end, it is very ugly. I will say And given what I've read on Letterboxd, this might be polarizing. I don't know. I loved Audrey Hepburn here. She is a bit irritating. But I think the character is meant to be grating for sure. She doesn't do any of her own singing, so we can't really judge.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. And she was very upset about that.
She was very upset about that. But as far as the verbal performance and how she is able to tap into this irritating street performer and how there's kind of an innocence built into that, I think is really great, especially when you juxtapose it to her learning to become someone of high society. I also think the costumes are undeniable. There were like 15,000 costumes made for this film, and they are exquisite. It's really great. The production design at times, I think, is really excellent as well. So from a craft perspective, there is some good things here. I like some of the performances, but on the whole, this is a film that just falls on its face in the end.
I don't necessarily dislike Audrey Hepburn in this movie. I don't necessarily dislike any of the performances here. I think it's more so a matter of, were these people the right actors for these particular roles? And I'm not sure if they were. I think if anything, I would say this movie is more miscast than it is badly acted. Because I think both Audrey Hepburn and even to probably even more of a bigger degree, Rex Harrison, they're both very good at tapping into the one-sidedness of their respective characters, and they overperform that one-sidedness to the point that when the movie does try to go for a more nuanced conversation on either gender dynamics or how dialect and body language can get you where you want, all affable themes, I think so many elements of the movie and those performances as well forget to find the middle ground to emphasize the important points of those conversations. And that's really the biggest issue I have. I think Audrey Hepburn really is a charming presence overall. I'm just not sure if she was the right person for this type of screechy character. And I can almost say the same thing about Rex Harrison. His performance here and the way that the character is written as well. I mean, this is essentially a Bond villain. I mean, that's how over the top this performance is. This is a man that threatens to starve Eliza if she doesn't do her vocal vowels at night. That is the cruelest thing, and the movie treats it as a joke, which I'm not necessarily opposed to that on its face. But when the movie asks us to shift our allegiance for him at a particular time, the movie and Rex's performance, they haven't done the work to bring us into that. And so many elements of the movie just feel like that mere setup, like you were saying. And even that setup, I think, is pretty clumsily handled. I love the costuming and the production design. I don't disagree with that. But after the mobility of movies like West Side Story, there's such a static energy to the musical numbers here that I just don't think allow some of these things to really sing. And that bothered me. That really bothered me, given the prickliness of this material. I think it needed something more. It needed more cynicism. This really needed a lot more cynicism, and perhaps it just happened to be a product of its time.
Well, see, that's interesting because that's all that I saw here was cynicism. And in a way, that's what made me a little excited to see where this is going to go. But it is one of those movies where it has to stick to landing to
justify that.
That cynicism. Because through a lot of this film, these characters are very rough around the edges, for sure. And I think that's what I loved about the performances. I have heard the argument that they are miscast, and maybe they are. But the film is aware of their egregious behavior, and the performers are equally aware. There are times where people push back against Harrison in some of the remarks he makes towards Eliza. And I think Audrey Hepburn does such a great job, and I do think this is crucial to the movie, of giving Eliza an innocence. She grows up on the streets. We learn enough about that through the dialogue and even some of the musical numbers. It's inferred that she probably doesn't have much of an education. All she knows is growing up in the streets and doing what you need to do to survive. That's all she knows. And there is a grating element to the character as a result, which I did not mind. I did not mind that at all, especially knowing where this film was ultimately going to go, and that she was going to be brought up into some sort of high society. What kind of hijinks can you bring out of that? And I think Hepburn's performance, and I don't know how to fully articulate it. I'm not a phonetics expert by any stretch of the imagination. And I don't even know if she gets the phonetics right. I'm not from England. I'm not from London. I have no idea. It could be just as egregious as the criticisms
it could just be
Mary
making it up.
Poppins got.
It almost feels like a sci-fi movie at times, given the experimentation of phonetics here.
But regardless of the accuracy of phonetics, I'm just talking about transitions, like noticeable transitions. She speaks a certain way early on in the film, and it is extreme, but other characters are using similar phonetics that are of the same economic stature as her. And then she is being taught to use a different phonetic language that, as she finds herself in these high society circumstances, she has to kind of navigate between. And there is some fun tomfoolery at times, though. The horse betting sequence, for example, I think is one of the best.
That's a good scene. That is when the movie came alive for me.
Yeah, that I think is really great. And Hepburn is so good. Again, remove accuracy, but just
that's a good
transition, the evolution of one extreme, trying to find some sort of middle ground, and then coming out on the other side with some sort of new identity while trying to be true to herself, I think is fantastic in the performance. So I do think, even if miscast, she is able to transcend that miscastness. Like, she's just that great of an actress.
There are pockets where it does work. I won't disagree with that.
I think she's really great. Now, for Rex Harrison, and this is where I think the film fails him more than he fails the film, because he is a coarse character. The dialogue that he is given is very brazen, and he taps into that with a similar brazen approach to his performance. And the film, again, is aware of it. His mom calls him out on it. You can get a sense between the performers that his mom isn't really all that interested in it.
I will say one thing
just as annoyed.
One thing I do like about the movie is how they do turn Henry into just a whiny mama's boy at one point.
Yes. Higgins as a character he's very abrasive. He's stilted, and people call him out on that constantly throughout this film. And it's very purposeful. Like, misogyny is built into the core of the behavior of these characters, especially of that character. And the film calls him out on it at times. That's why I kept waiting for the shoe to drop, because the film would sprinkle in these little things of like, okay, it seems to know what it's doing. Yes, this is ugly. Yes, this doesn't look great. And maybe it's hard to get through in the moment. That's why if you have an Enora type sticking of the landing and you get to that final scene and it just really punches home what this whole film was all about, it will recontextualize all of that and make sense of it, which I was more than willing to get there. A lot of people
just needed to end earlier.
Didn't.
This movie just needed to end earlier.
That is true. It is a little overlong. I agree with that. But I kept waiting. Let's get to the end. Let's see how it sticks the landing. And that's why, and I do want to talk about this further, the failing to stick the landing, that's what undermines the performance more than anything else. I think Harrison does a good job of bringing about the abrasiveness of that character, and the film just doesn't utilize it at all. Doesn't make sense of that ugliness in any sort of way. In fact, if anything, it reinforces it in the end, which is why the film itself, I think, is ugly. I don't think it's on the performers as much
Well,
as it
no,
is the film.
no, and I want to be clear when I talked about maybe my issues with the characters and even some of the casting choices here. A movie can be miscast and still have overall good performances. Like that's still a
Sure, sure, sure.
possibility, and I think that's
Yeah.
more or less what's happening
And
here.
that could be the case here. Like those
Yeah.
things don't have to be mutually exclusive.
Right. Yeah. So when I say if I think the movie is miscast, I think if anything, that's the film failing these people. At every turn, the movie fails itself and the people on screen more so than anything else. A lot of it really does come down to the rhythm and pacing of it all, because by the time we get to that ending, it was interesting because I ended up pausing the movie at one point, either to walk into the kitchen or something like that, and I was thinking to myself, wow, there must be a lot of time left because no one here has had any type of arc yet. And I saw there was 20 minutes left in the movie and no one had an arc. It's like there was no trajectory in that sense. And that's once again the movie failing its story and its
Yeah.
actors and
No, I
everything
agree.
in there. And it becomes even worse when the actual ending we get completely doubles back on any potential it could have had. I mean, that's why I said the movie should have ended earlier. There's a point where I think it could have ended and at least maintained the right
Yeah.
level of ambiguity as opposed to the actual ambiguity it decides to go for, which is the wrong type of ambiguity. I'm
Yeah, it
sure we
doesn't
could talk further about that. Yeah, this is
No, and
yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's it. I think the ambiguity here is very much miscalculated.
Mhm.
It is trying to tackle classism. It's trying to grapple with misogyny and gender dynamics. But as we've noted, it fails to critically engage with any of those ideas. Instead of challenging Higgins and his treatment of Eliza, the film ultimately reinforces his control over her. The film's gender dynamics are obviously a product of its time, but regardless, Eliza has no agency, and her transformation is entirely positioned by Higgins, a man who is openly cruel, he is dismissive and manipulative,
Yeah.
and the film never holds him accountable. Again, not that this has to be a tale of morality, but there's no grappling with his egregious behavior, even though the film is self-aware. And as a result, his arrogance is framed as part of his charm rather than something to be criticized. Any reckoning of his behavior is brushed aside, which is incredibly feckless. It is bad storytelling, especially given the innocence of Eliza. She is obviously a bit boorish herself, as we noted, but we come to understand that her personality is born out of her economic status and living off the streets. She wants to improve her life. We do see that. The idea of getting a job as an assistant in a flower shop is like winning the lottery for her. Obviously, Higgins helps her in a small way despite his greasy schemes. And it seems as if the film wants to give Eliza agency, which is what I love about a lot of those scenes leading up to the final moment. But in the end, her arc is undercut by a choice that completely undermines any growth that she had developed, and it makes it all feel futile. That final scene is so frustrating as it suggests submission rather than self-actualization, which
yeah.
is not at all what it had set up literally moments before, seconds before.
That is exactly where the movie trips over its own feet because it's clearly going for some type of ambiguity by the end, but that's why I said earlier it picks the wrong type of ambiguity. It tries to suggest a romantic ambiguity, but instead it fails to realize that regardless of how you choose to read that, there is still some type of reconciliation between these two characters. Whether it ends up becoming romantic or not is beside the point. That submission, that reconciliation at the end completely undermines the whole movie. That's why the movie should have ended earlier. It should have ended at that argument scene with Higgins just walking down the street and then cut to credits. There's at least sort of a prickly version of this story. And to be fair, I still wouldn't have cared for the movie even up until that point, but I wouldn't have been this pissed off by it. There's still problems I have with it, as I articulated earlier, but this ending just further solidified why this does not work for me. And it may be a product of its time, but I mean, I don't know. There have been bold and daring and even prickly movies on this subject, even around this time as well. So
Yeah.
I think to say it's a product of his time, I don't even think is a fair justification for it
No,
anymore.
and I agree. I agree. I do think it is very regressive.
Yeah.
Perhaps by 1964 standards, but especially today. And look, again, foundationally, I have no problem with the film presenting its misogyny the way it does. It is ugly. It is very, very ugly. But up until the end, to me anyway, that felt intentional. That felt
Okay.
purposeful because it seemed as if the film was going to wrestle with that in some sort of way. At least that's what I was anticipating. That's what a smart movie would do.
It does, yeah, it does not at all. It's and like I said, it's interesting. It gets to a point where I thought, oh, there's a lot of time left on this movie, and then I realized there's 20 minutes left, and it hadn't done any of that.
Yeah.
Like this is a very repetitive movie. It really is a very repetitive experience.
No, I agree. And you think about those regressive qualities, how Eliza's success is wholly reliant on a male figure, an abrasive male figure in Higgins. And you compare that to, let's say, a Mary Poppins, who isn't
What a
reliant on
movie.
anybody.
What a
She is
movie.
the stronghold. She is the force of that movie. And maybe to your point, why even holding it to 1964 standards should be enough.
Yeah.
And maybe that's why, Julie Andrews won Best Actress. I don't know. But it does say something that My Fair Lady won Best Picture over Mary Poppins.
That
Like,
is so weird.
it's-
That's just so weird.
Which, and look, it is the story of the Academy. Like, 3 steps forward, always 2 steps back, it feels like. Like the 70s kind of, for the most part, I think, does a great job of avoiding that. But generally with the Academy, even our 1940s decade that we did last year, it was a little bit of that, right? Like you'd be have a couple great winners in a row, then they're like, really? And then a couple great winners, then they're like, okay, really? Like it just always goes back and forth. in that
This, I am not too familiar with George Cukor's work as a director. I've seen a few of his films, but 2 of his most celebrated movies being My Fair Lady and The Philadelphia Story, another one of his
Yeah.
most celebrated movies.
Yeah.
These are 2 movies that I think have the exact same problem. They botch the ending. The Philadelphia Story is a movie that I know is well regarded, and it's certainly charming in its own way. But man, I think that movie ruins itself because of how it chooses to conclude and where that romance ultimately goes. And I could say the same thing here. These 2 movies have very regressive conclusions, which is interesting to say for a director that also directed the movie Gaslight, which actually felt ahead of its time. So
Yeah.
it's such a strange thing that his 2 most celebrated movies, I think, are the ones that I just can't view today in a way that feels appropriate given our current day and age. I don't think they've aged well at all. And I think this one, My Fair Lady, is the more egregious example here.
Yeah. What did you think about his A Star Is Born? Have you seen that one?
I love it. I think it's great.
Yeah. I love
That
it
might
as
be his
well.
best movie. Yeah.
I was just about to say, I think that's probably easily his best movie, although I probably shouldn't say that because I'm looking at the list here. There's a lot I just haven't seen. But of those that are considered like notable films, historically speaking, Gaslight and A Star Is Born, I think, are the 2 that I would be like I could easily recommend both of those films for sure.
Yeah. I'm curious about some of these other ones because I know his movies are well cast and they seem charming enough. But
Yeah.
I mean, I got to say, Philadelphia Story and My Fair Lady are ones that just haven't landed for me. They really haven't at all.
I love the Little Women narrative. I'd be curious about that film, especially because that stars Katharine Hepburn. So
I know.
might go back to that Little Women just to kind of get that connection.
Oh, that
But
was
I haven't seen it. I can't
1933.
speak
Wow.
to it.
Yeah. She
And
was young there.
that is pre-code, so I'm like, there's a world where that is a really good movie. But I don't know. And, especially with Katharine Hepburn, man, she's one of the best.
He's worked with her a few times. He's
yeah.
worked with. I mean, the two of them worked together, or like the two of them being Katharine Hepburn, even Cary Grant. They worked together a few times in George Cocor's films. Like Holiday apparently has some fans as well. But yeah, I forgot he directed another version of Little Women. That's interesting.
Yeah. People love themselves some Little Women. It is a good story. I love that story as well.
I guess he also did a Romeo and Juliet at one point too.
I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But who hasn't?
That's true.
Right.
Everyone has at this point.
Everyone has a Romeo and Juliet on their resume.
So it's fair to say he's a very celebrated filmmaker with a lot of celebrated films under his belt. But yeah, if you look at his page on Letterboxd, which tends to rank their movies based on popularity and how many people have viewed them, his two most popular I don't think are very good, and that's My Fair Lady and The Philadelphia Story.
Yeah, I do think this is a bad Best Picture winner, especially when you're going up against the electric Mary Poppins, and I think one of Kubrick's best films in Dr. Strangelove. That film is so biting in its commentary. You want to talk about sticking the landing. Where really both of those films stick the landing.
This year should have been a tie for Best Picture between those two films.
Yeah, hands down. Yeah, those two easily clean My Fair Lady. No doubt about it.
I agree.
I would have had a really tough time on my ballot choosing between Strangelove and Mary Poppins. That would have been really tough. But My Fair Lady would have easily been out of the conversation for me.
Between those two for me as well. I have a soft spot for Mary Poppins. I saw it first. It's an early favorite of mine and still remains a favorite of mine. So that might still get the edge, but I can't deny that Dr. Strangelove is certainly the smarter movie.
Oh my gosh.
One of the smartest movies of the 1960s, honestly.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. One of the best films of that whole decade.
Yeah.
Forget Best Picture winners. Yeah. That film is
a very funny movie. What a funny movie.
Yeah, it's in my top 20 of all time. Like I think it is just absolutely incredible.
Interesting. So I guess, but for Stanley Kubrick specifically, it's 2001: A Space Odyssey and Dr. Strangelove. Are those your two?
Those are my two. Yeah.
Oh, that's a good two.
Yeah, but like he's, flip a coin with Kubrick. Like there's, I don't love Barry Lyndon as much as others do. That's probably the one that I'm kind of lesser on.
Okay.
But the rest of his films I'm really, really high on. But those two for sure. It's definitely those are the two. And both of those two are in my top 20.
The way you feel about Barry Lyndon is how I feel about A Clockwork Orange. That one I don't love.
All right, that's fair. Yeah. That one I will need to revisit. I haven't seen that since college. So I'm due for a revisit for
certainly don't dislike it. I mean, it's an entertaining movie for what it is. It's one that's never emotionally connected with me as much as these other ones.
Yeah, that's fair. No, it is a weird movie. I definitely will not deny anyone that for sure.
Mm-hmm.
At any rate, going back to My Fair Lady. So you noted that this is maybe your least favorite Best Picture winner. I do have to wrestle with that a little bit further because there are movies that I think I like less on the whole than this one. I do agree with you that My Fair Lady would probably get my vote for the ugliest Best Picture winner, the one that doesn't hold up the most of those that I've seen. It might take the award for that. But when we circle back to even some of the films we talked about in the 40s, I do like Audrey Hepburn's performance a lot. I like the costumes in this film a lot. I like some of its production design. It is overly long, and in the end, it doesn't stick the landing, and it's not a film that I ever want to revisit as a result. If it had stuck the landing, I would have been more than okay to suffer through its grading qualities if it meant something in the end. I'm okay with that. I love it when movies do that. In a lot of ways, you could argue that with something like Spring Breakers, for example. Like talk about despicable characters that, at least for me, that I love, but I think that's a film
I
that
don't
makes
know.
sense of everything that it portrays.
It certainly
But that's
does,
another
but I don't
film-
know. Alien is just one hell of a character.
He is one hell of a character.
Yeah.
But I think Eliza here is compelling in an alien kind of way for me. Like that to me is the prowess of Hepburn's performance. Again, that's about as far as the comparisons go, because man, those two characters are just nothing alike outside of that. But
There's ever a time to compare My Fair Lady and Spring Break. This is the one and only time you'll ever hear it.
the one and only, yeah. But like, I can see why people are like find Spring Breakers off-putting, because there isn't much to like about those characters, and they're doing all of these egregious things. But the film ultimately makes sense of it in the end. And that's what I was waiting for with this. I was having a similar experience where I'm waiting for that shoe to drop, and then it just never does. And if anything, it only reinforces its ugliness, which is ultimately why I can never really go through this film again.
I couldn't either. And
but
even
I-
getting to that ending, I was struggling with it up until that point too.
Totally fair. But I would take it over some of the like my least favorite of the 40s that we did last year. I might take My Fair Lady over that, just because of some of its production value. Like, not everything lives in these. I mean, you know this very well, but like, not everything lives on this dichotomy of it's either great or it's the worst thing ever.
Well, that and it's hard to compare movies from the 60s or even the 40s with even the movies from like 10 years ago or so. It's a completely different vibe of filmmaking. So when I make a very hyperbolic statement like My Fair Lady might be my least favorite Best Picture winner I've seen, it's really admittedly meant to be just a hyperbolic statement. But as I look at as I look at some of these other movies that did go on to win Best Picture, even some of the more recent ones, I'm trying to see if I can find one that I know I like less than My Fair Lady, given my fresh relationship with My Fair Lady. Maybe The Artist, I would say I like less than My Fair Lady. I think I might take Crash over it, if I'm being honest.
Wow. Yeah. See, like that's a good example. So I was trying to keep it within the context of the series, so I didn't really expand outside of that scope. But if we are, then I would take it over Crash. I would take it over The Artist. I would maybe even take it over The King's Speech. I find that pretty much a dud.
That's a very banal film.
Very, very banal film. I haven't seen this film in a long time, but I've never been a big fan of Shakespeare in Love either. So that's kind of a toss-up. I may come around on, like, again, it's been 20, maybe 20 plus years since I've seen that film, so don't hold me to that.
Because that's possibly a movie that has become unfairly hated simply because it lost Best Picture to Saving Private Ryan, or it beat Saving Private Ryan.
Thin Red Line, like, give me a break.
That's true. Yeah,
and maybe that was my bias, like even more so than Saving Private Ryan. And I love Saving Private Ryan. I do think it's a great Spielberg film, but man, the Thin Red Line, like now that's that's my beating heart there. So like,
that's Malik's our boy. He's our boy.
Yeah, and which is why 98 maybe kind of feels a little bit like 64, where you're like, you got two great films in Strangelove and Mary Poppins, and then this film wins. That is currently how I feel about Shakespeare in Love over those two. So some similar comparisons to be made there. But again, maybe that's not quite as fair. I need to give Shakespeare in Love a revisit. Going back to something I said a moment ago, as far as films that don't hold up, maybe it takes that cake. American Beauty probably fights for that crown as well.
Oh,
that one
very
next
much
year,
does.
99.
It very much. That's why I think doing the 90s might be a very fun one for us when we do this series again.
Maybe that'll be the next decade we go with.
There are a lot of Best Picture winners from the 90s that I feel like fall into this category of, was it the right choice?
We're about to head into the 90s with our yearly retrospective, so
perfect time to do
next year.
Cross contaminate, I guess. Yeah.
So maybe we do the 90s next. At any rate, I don't really have anything else to add with My Fair Lady. It's a film that just it failing to stick the landing is the difference for me.
That's a fair point. Yeah.
And that's where I ultimately agree with Brendan. Not great.
Not great. Not great.
Okay. Well, with that, if you agree or disagree with anything we had to say here, and if the people listening to this, if it's indicative of Letterboxd at all, the opinions are all over the place.
Oh, yeah. I see no consistency with this one.
Yes. Leave a comment below if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, hit us up on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can always email us InSessionFilm@gmail.com. All right. Earlier in the show, we talked about the Electric Stadium Black Bag. We do have reviews of those two films up from last week. Be sure to go and check those out. We will have new reviews this week of Snow White. In keeping with the pseudo-animated theme, obviously Snow White is a live-action version of its animated predecessor.
No, it's
not. We decided, well, fair enough. We'll get to that later. But we paired Snow White with The Day the Earth Blew Up, a Looney Tunes movie. We're going to talk about that one as well.
Absolutely.
I very much look forward to getting into both of those. And then stay tuned for a new Women in Session later on this week. I just recorded an episode with the Women in Session ladies.
Oh, nice.
I'm not sure when it's going to go out, but I had a great time talking with them.
Yeah,
their latest
great.
episode was on the women of James Bond, which I thought was really compelling.
Awesome
So you
topic.
can go and check that out. Yeah, it was really great. So go and check all of that out. Busy as always. Great stuff happening on the website, InSessionFilm.com. Stay tuned for all of that as well. Any final thoughts, Brendan, before we get out of here?
Just that I hope you feel better and continue to be on the mend,
Appreciate
so
it.
that way when we talk about Snow White, you don't get sick again for
Yeah,
other
well,
reasons.
Might be inevitable. Last final thought for me, go Blue. Michigan
That's
into
right.
the Sweet
That's
16,
right, Sweet
baby.
16.
Absolutely love it. It's been a few years since we've been out of the tournament, but we got a new head coach. We're back. We're rolling. It's very exciting stuff. So hopefully we keep dancing. Anyway, that's my In-Session Sports for the
There
week.
you go. Kept it small.
Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you next time on the In-Session Film Podcast.